Listen, what if I told you that your brain is basically a computer system? It's incredibly powerful, sure, but it is also completely full of biological backdoors, unpatched vulnerabilities, and zero-day exploits. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a deeply controversial yet absolutely fascinating reality. The human mind is a system, and it can be hacked. And the people doing the hacking? Well, they aren't sitting in dark basements with glowing laptops. No, they are military strategists, neuromarketers, and professional illusionists who have completely mastered the architecture of human belief.
So I really want you to ask yourself this piercing question right out of the gate. Is the reality you're experiencing actually your own? Or is it a carefully constructed environment curated by invisible forces that are literally designed to push your buttons and steer your behavior? Because that right there is the entire premise of what military strategists call the cognitive battle space.
All right, let's lay the groundwork by defining our terms. Information warfare. It's the fusion of large-scale influence operations and psychological warfare, specifically designed to affect critical nodes within a population. See, warfare isn't just about bullets and bombs anymore. It's about mobilizing or demobilizing massive populations just by targeting their perceptions. And honestly, whether it's state actors trying to destabilize an entire nation or professional marketers manipulating you into buying a product, the underlying mechanisms of influence are shockingly similar.
Here is our game plan for this explainer. 1. The vulnerable human mind. 2. Tactics of behavioral modification. 3. Mapping the cognitive battle space. 4. Weapons of mass influence. And 5. The era of truth decay.
Okay, Section 1. The vulnerable human mind. Your brain's backdoors. To truly understand mass manipulation, we first have to look at how the individual mind processes information. Behavioral operational research shows us this fascinating biological divide in our brains. You've got System 1, which is quick, highly emotional, and driven by mental shortcuts. And then you've got System 2, which is your reflective, analytical, logical brain. Now, because deeply analyzing data takes massive amounts of biological energy, our brains are kinda lazy. We frequently default to that vulnerable System 1, and this is exactly where the hackers strike. Because if they can trigger your emotions, they literally lock out your System 2 logic entirely.
Get this, let me give you a wild example of how easily our logic just gets bypassed. It's this phenomenon called neuroenchantment. Researchers actually built a totally fake, crude mock brain scanner and told university students that it could read their most complex thoughts. Using a classic magic trick, they made it seem like this junk machine was deciphering their minds. And the crazy part? Even undergraduate neuroscience students, people formally trained to know better, deemed this impossible technology highly plausible simply because it was dressed up as advanced science. No way, right?
Which brings us to the original cognitive hackers, magicians. Magic tricks deliberately violate the expected causal relationships that form our implicit belief systems about what is possible in the real world. So, when a magician makes a coin vanish, they are executing an expectation violation. And fMRI scans actually show this triggers a very specific neural response in a part of the brain called the caudate nucleus. Magicians aren't using statistical averages. They're executing real-time cognitive manipulations, surgically exploiting the blind spots in our attention and perception.
Which leads us to Section 2, Tactics of Behavioral Modification, the mechanism of influence.
Military and intelligence professionals actually map out these exact cognitive quirks and weaponize them to modify behavior. And it all starts with the foundation of tactical decision-making, the military OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and act. Literally every decision you make goes through this rapid cycle. So here is the crucial takeaway. Propagandists specifically target the orient phase. That's the moment where you filter new information through your culture, your genetics, your past experiences. If a highly trained adversary can subtly distort your orientation through manipulated context, well, they don't even have to force you to act. You will naturally decide to act exactly how they want you to.
Now, on an interpersonal level, one of the absolute most effective ways to hack someone's orientation is through a technique called isopraxis, basically behavioral mirroring. It's a deeply ingrained biological response. Think of an infant smiling just because its mother smiles. By adopting another person's communication style, their pacing, or even their physical posture, a trained operative or a slick neuromarketer completely bypasses your cognitive firewall. It builds immediate unconscious trust because biologically, we are hardwired to crave similarity.
But what happens when these professionals want to intentionally short-circuit your logic instead of building trust? Well, they use specific debating tactics designed to drag you kicking and screaming back into that emotional System 1 processing. Name-calling, scapegoating, playing on deep fears and prejudices, purposely misrepresenting positions, and my personal favorite, calling opinions facts. Listen, these aren't just logical fallacies. They are deliberate behavioral modifications. They're used on cable news networks and in political debates every single day to aggressively steer public discourse away from actual analysis and directly into pure, predictable emotional reaction. Moving on to Section 3, Mapping the Cognitive Battle Space, from physical to mental.
So if isopraxis and emotional triggers work so well on the individual, what happens when militaries scale these exact tactics up to entire societies? We have to fundamentally change how we view warfare. For centuries, conflict was fought in the physical domain, land, sea, air. But today, the ultimate high ground is the cognitive domain. The primary targets aren't just bridges or power plants anymore. The targets are your perceptions, your emotions, and your core beliefs. In this new battle space, human attention and public consent are the ultimate prizes.
And this builds directly into mathematical targeting. Militaries actually use social network analysis to map human populations the exact same way they'd map physical terrain. By calculating centrality measures, like who has the most ties or who bridges different conflicting groups together, they can mathematically identify key influencers in a crowd. Take the 2020 protests in Portland, for example. Open source intelligence was used to map out the combined Portland network. By pinpointing the highly central actors in that specific network, operatives knew exactly who to support, who to influence, or who to neutralize to either spark further discord or restore order. It's a literal formula.
Once that network is mapped, adversaries can systematically escalate unrest through a very rigid, doctrinal military model of resistance. First, inject foreign money. Then, start distributing the propaganda, escalated by sending in non-violent agitators. And only later, once the pot is boiling, do you introduce weapons and violent foreign agents. It is a slow, methodical, brilliantly calculated hacking of a society's stability, designed entirely to provoke an overreaction from the state and inflame public opinion.
Section 4. Weapons of Mass Influence. Propaganda at Scale.
All right, we've seen the theory. Now let's look at how these cognitive weapons have actually been deployed at scale over the last century, because state-sponsored influence operations are absolutely not a modern invention of the social media age. Back in World War I, we saw the standardization of war propaganda. By World War II, units were actively deploying black propaganda, fake intelligence perfectly designed to look like it came from within the enemy's own ranks. In the 1980s, the Soviets ran massive global disinformation campaigns, and by 2016, organizations like the Internet Research Agency were weaponizing social media algorithms to execute influence operations at a scale we had never seen before.
Take a textbook modern case study, the Syrian conflict. Information warriors shaped international public consent by creating a strictly binary reality. It was engineered using the propaganda of aversion, framing one side as the ultimate unforgivable evil, and the propaganda of attraction, framing the other side as the ultimate good. By totally dominating the information space with emotional logic and scripted narratives, military strategists were able to mobilize global sentiment remarkably well. It proves that seemingly trivial media details are, in fact, incredibly powerful weapons of war.
15%. That is the percentage of Americans surveyed who truly believed that their own government created AIDS as a form of genocide against African Americans. This shocking statistic is a direct result of a Soviet disinformation campaign from the 1980s known as Operation Infection. It is a terrifying testament to the sheer return on investment of a well-executed psychological operation. Decades and decades later, the fabricated narrative still lives and breathes in the cognitive domain.
Finally, Section 5. The Era of Truth Decay. The Systemic Fallout.
So what actually happens to a society when its cognitive domain has been continuously bombarded by these weapons of mass influence for decades? You get a systemic fallout known as truth decay. This is the rapidly diminishing role of facts in public life. When the baseline of reality has been hacked over and over again, shared facts are simply no longer agreed upon. Take the anti-vaccination movement, which continues to thrive despite massive amounts of robust empirical medical data. Why? Because in a state of truth decay, personal, emotional anecdotes carry infinitely more weight than cold data, and our distrust in traditional institutions is at an all-time high.
When you compare the traditional information landscape to our current era, the contrast is stark. We have moved from a society with a relatively shared baseline of facts and high institutional trust right into a hyperpolarized landscape. Now, algorithms feed our confirmation biases 24/7, and people rely on social media influencers to construct their reality for them. The hackers have successfully, and perhaps permanently, eroded our collective trust in objective truth. But here is the most important, fundamental takeaway from this entire explainer. These psychological operations, these active measures, they do not invent our societal flaws. They don't have to. They surgically exploit the pre-existing social tensions, the biases, and the vulnerabilities that are already present within our human systems. We provide the fuel, they just provide the spark.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal question to consider before we wrap up. In a world where military strategists, algorithms, and marketers view your attention as the absolute ultimate weapon and your mind as the ultimate battle space, how will you defend your reality? Stay focused, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next explainer.